The storm came low and fast, like a beast on its belly. It scraped the ridge with frozen claws, drove breath back into throats, and filled every hollow with white. A toppled stagecoach lay jammed between two boulders, door buckled, one wheel spinning like a coin that wouldn't lie down. Dr. Nora Bell, 29, precise hands, stubborn chin, brown hair wet with ice, crawled out with a hiss of pain, one arm around her belly, the other clutching a scuffed leather satchel that clinked with glass. The wind bit her eyes raw, her lips bled and froze. Above her, an ice shelf cracked. It went off like a drum. Powder shot over the slope and made the snow hum. Nora lurched for a black seam in the rock. A shallow cave mouth rhymed with teeth of ice. The satchel slipped, thumped, sprang open. A strip of calf hide with a crooked burned brand skittered out. A single blue bead bounced once and disappeared in the white. Hold steady, she told herself, because panic would spend her quicker than blood. Hold steady and move. Two silhouettes posted on the ridge like crows on a rail, dark against a white sky. One lifted a rifle. The cold light blinked on steel. Nora felt her stomach harden around the life under her ribs. They had heaved her out of the coach. Now they waited to finish what the fall and the storm might not. She ran 3 steps. Her heel punched through crust into a hollow, and the land yanked at her like a mouth. She threw her weight forward and caught a thorny juniper root with both hands. The root burned her palms. Snow sagged, hissed, held. She kicked, rolled, gasped, and slid on her belly into the cave mouth where the wind dropped by half. Her heart hammered like a fist on a locked door. Something moved at the rim, silent, sure. A man knelt with the north light behind him. His hair was bound. A hawk feather lay along the tie, rimed with frost. A buffalo hide robe hung from his shoulders over a shirt stitched with dark thread at the cuffs. He carried a bow. He didn't aim. He lifted a palm so she could see it empty. Shnee shnee. No fast, he said low, the Lakota words soft in the wind. Then, in slow English, step where the snow stays hard. She stared. He had walked to her on snowshoes that left long oval ghosts instead of holes. The wind read him and let him pass. She nodded, forced herself up, and edged toward him on careful, flat feet, spreading her weight. He backed away, resetting his own weight like a teacher showing steps. Behind them, the rifle winked again. The ice shelf above the ridge spoke, one long groan, and a sheet let go, sliding across the slope with the sigh of a sleeping giant turning over. The men on the ridge shifted, cursed, checked their horses. When Nora reached him, the man set the hide around her shoulders without touching her. Smoke and sage clung to it, warm even in the cut of the wind. Nora Bell, she said, because names make a line you can hold in bad weather. Akecheta Gray. Hawk, he said. We go. Cave deeper. They moved like shadows under the rock teeth. The cave opened a shoulder. Akecheta set a fire the size of 2 hands on a flat stone, so the heat ran quick across the rock. He lit a curl of sage and lifted the smoke with a slow hand toward the satchel, toward her head, toward the door, like he was asking the place for room. She nodded once, grateful for rules that did not waste words. Willow bark, he said, crushing strips in his palm before he set them to steep. Safe for a woman carrying. Thank you, she said. Her voice sounded far away. She sipped, and heat loosened the clamp across her belly. Outside, hooves punched the crust. The wind carried voices. There, one said. She slid in. Finish it. Akecheta's mouth thinned. He didn't pick up the bow. He listened to the rock, head turned a fraction, like the cave spoke in a pitch too low for most men to hear. Not here, he breathed. Snow will lie for us. His eyes moved to the satchel. You dropped a brand, he said, not a question. A crooked one, Nora said. Enough like another man's to steal a herd on paper. And a bead, he added. Her fingers went to her pocket like the bead could answer for itself. She felt the small hard circle and closed her fist. Yes, she said. A child's bead, not mine. Akecheta's gaze flicked to her belly, then away, giving her that privacy. We walk when the wind lifts the top, he said. They read only big signs. We read small. The ridge moaned again. Powder slid with the sound of silk torn by cold hands. The men above cursed. One spat a name. Rook, Nora heard. Not the deputy who had dragged her door wide and smiled like he'd practiced in mirrors. Silas Rook. The other one, Ephraim, cattle buyer, brand forger, the man who had told her in the boarding house hallway, low and soft, that if she put her clean signature under a dirty ledger line, the territory would forget one ugly winter ever happened. And if I don't, she had asked, then the law takes what men raise, he'd said, eyes on her belly like it was his to price. Now the storm wrote over his mouth. When we reach the pass, we move below the cornice, not under it, Akecheta said. You listen to the snow. It sings when it will kill you. Nora almost smiled. I'll listen. They slid out of the cave's black lip, while the wind lifted plumes from the ridge like white smoke. Akecheta showed her how to place her snowshoe tails so they wouldn't catch, how to keep her weight flat, how to stop and breathe when the land changed tone. He drew a quick pattern in the drift with a willow twig, then scuffed it away. For the wind, he said, not for men. They crossed a hollow that boomed underfoot, low and warning. Akecheta angled them to a firmer seam. The wind cut, then softened, then cut again. Blue shadows lay in the snow like bruises. Nora's breath steamed, and the taste of iron came back to her tongue. At a saddle in the ridge, Akecheta lifted his palm. Here, he said. The snow answered with a thin glass ring from the cornice above. He skirted wide. The cornice held its breath, then forgot them. They made the pass. On the far side, the wind dropped to a steady scrape, and the land opened into a bowl, pricked with sage and dead grass, like gray stubble. Akecheta pointed with his chin at a darker welt along the base of a drift. Spring, he said. Water under skin. We stop one hand of time. They crouched behind willows choked with ice. Akecheta broke the skin with a stick. Black water showed teeth and breathed. Nora rinsed blood from a scrape on her knuckle and watched it swirl away, like a promise she hadn't believed in anyway. Why did they throw you? Akecheta asked, pitching his voice like he was talking to the spring, not to her. Because Deputy Silas Rook wants paper to do what his rifle can't, Nora said. He thinks a doctor's hand can cure a brand. He thinks fear can cure a doctor. And the bead? His eyes were steady, not prying. It doesn't belong to the child everyone thinks it belongs to, she said. The words came out like ice cracking. Once. Clean. He nodded as if he'd heard the same kind of wrong before. Wichapi chikala, little star, he said, gentle, naming the bead like a thing worth speaking to. We carry it. We speak right about it. We give it back where it belongs. He glanced at her belly, then away again. When you can talk without making your breath hot. Hooves creaked on the crust above. Men dismounted. A boot heel stamped. A voice she knew. Deputy Rook, thin and pleased. Doctor, come out. It'll be warmer in the jail. Akecheta's fingers found Nora's wrist under the robe. He didn't squeeze. He set his hand like a drumbeat and made her pulse slow to it. He guided her eyes to a fox slit in the bank. Narrow, dark. Out the small door. He breathed. When I speak, shoot the brush, Rook said to his men, cheerful. We'll cough her out. Akecheta stood. He did not roar. He did not challenge. He stepped into sight like the storm had carved him there, and he'd been part of the rock all along. He drew and loosed in one breath. His arrow struck the rifle barrel of the man on Rook's left and made the shot go wide. Snow leapt like a white cat where the bullet hit. Now, Akecheta murmured, and Nora wriggled through the fox door on elbows and knees, belly pressed by cold walls. Snow scraped her coat like fingernails. She burst into thin light and staggered to her feet. Akecheta slid out behind her, quick as a mink. They ran for the basin's far timber. Belle! Rook's voice chased them, tinny in the wind. You give me that strip and that bead, or I take what you're hiding and sell it back to you by the ounce. Nora didn't look back. Akecheta's hand guided her. Left, right, left. The snow under them sang high and then lower, and he changed their path by degrees to match the pitch, like a singer finding harmony. Shots snapped. Powder spit from the crust at Nora's knee and peppered her skin through the dress with cold sting. She kept moving. The child turned once hard and settled, like a fist unclenching. They reached the basin's throat, and the land spoke in a new voice, a low, long groan. The cornice line above them shivered. Akecheta stopped dead. He lifted his palm. "Haya," he said. "No." Rook's men, lighter in knowledge and heavier in breath, pounded onto the lip in a clump. The lip broke under the first man's boot. He dropped to his hips, arms flailing. The second man crashed into him. The cornice let go. A white wall slid. The world moved sideways in one smooth, terrible motion. Akecheta flattened Nora with a hand to her shoulder. Snow washed over them knee-deep, then thigh-deep, then dropped past like a cold river. Men shouted once, and then went quiet. Rook reeled back in time, rifle up to keep it dry, face pink with cold and pleasure, that anything still belonged to him. He braced, aimed. Nora yanked the burned brand strip from her satchel and flung it high. It sailed like a black bird, fell short, and slapped the crust. For one heartbeat, Rook's eyes jumped to it. Stitched leather, crooked iron, the lie he needed. A shape shouldered up from a fold in the drift to his right. An old bull bison, hide scarred, ribs showing like rails under a winter tarp. The slide had woken it. It swiveled with slow fury and hit Rook just as he fired. His shot winged wild into the gray. He vanished backward with a shout no one answered. The basin went back to storm and breath. Akecheta's mouth didn't smile, but the edges of his eyes eased, just for a blink. "The land keeps its own count," he said. "Then it owes us a quiet hour," Nora said. "Maybe the half of one," he said, already listening for the next wrong sound. They cut for timber and found birch that hummed a little wind song through its catkin bones. Akecheta studied the snow's skin. "More men ahead," he said. "Soldiers, not his." He tapped where a crust had sagged and refrozen in a deep, regular pattern. "Heavy. Marching. The officer makes his horse walk like it practices." "Fort men?" Nora asked. "Sent out to collect what the papers tell," Akecheta said. "Maybe cattle, maybe people, maybe both." He looked at her. "We will not give them a story they can bend." They walked into the open because there was no other way to cross. 6 soldiers in blue spread a half circle. Steam rose from collars, roped the air, blew thin. The lieutenant in front lifted his gloved hand. "That's close enough," he called. "Names." "Akecheta Greyhawk," Akecheta said, steady. "Oglala Lakota." He inclined his head a touch toward Nora. "Dr. Nora Bell. She tends life." The lieutenant shifted in his saddle. His horse stamped once. Annoyed at all this winter, he eyed the bow, the satchel, the coat that didn't quite hide Nora's shape. He glanced up the ridge. Rook crawled into view, one sleeve ripped, hat gone, rifle held wrong from the shoulder. He waved big. "Lieutenant, they jumped us, robbed the mail. The Indian took the woman. I was thrown," Nora said, plain as a ledger line. "Deputy Silas Rook ordered it. He wanted my signature where a brand didn't belong." She swallowed, then decided to spend the truth. "He means to take a child that is not his and make it his paper way." The lieutenant's mouth flattened. He had the look of a man who'd watched too many reports fold to fit another man's pocket. He glanced back at Rook. "You have warrants?" he asked. "They burned," Rook said, too fast. "But the law doesn't burn when it's written honest," the lieutenant said. He tugged his reins, and the horse danced a step. Then he looked at Akecheta. "You're under notice." "For what thing today?" Akecheta asked. "No heat. The notice changes with the wind that turns your flags." A private coughed, then choked off a laugh. The lieutenant pretended not to hear it. He drew a breath that steamed in a straight white line. "We will step to the bank and sort this with heat and less wind," he said. "All of us. Rook, bring your men down. Nobody fires anything." Akecheta's eyes flicked to the slope. A hairline crack ran like a black thread across the new slab. The snow made a high note again. "Bad bank," he said, low, to Nora alone. "It will open its mouth." They walked in a clumsy knot, soldiers warier now, Rook limping and hungry-eyed, Nora tasting iron again. The crack widened while they watched, as if the ground were tired of the weight of men. The lieutenant's horse tossed its head and tried to step sideways. "Lieutenant," Nora said. "Listen." He did. His jaw jumped. "Back," he snapped. "Back the line." The bank sighed and caved. The lips slid. A soldier's boot went out from under him, and he clawed at air and grabbed a friend's sleeve. The friend shouted and grabbed a branch. The branch broke. Snow poured into the cut like flour from a torn sack. Akecheta's rope snapped off his belt as he threw it. The loop fell true around Nora's shoulders as the crust under her cracked. She went down fast to the hips. Cold water touched her boots like a mouth. She threw her weight forward and caught the far edge with numb fingers. Akecheta dug his heels, wrapped the rope, braced against a pine root, and drew her up in jerks. The rope groaned. Fibers popped. Rook saw two bodies in trouble and smiled like a wolf. The knot slipped a hair. The rope cut Nora's arms. She locked her elbows and thought of a blue bead in a church ledger and a woman in a back room who had not cried out loud. The land roared all around them, white and moving. The rope screamed once more and held. Akecheta's teeth bared with the effort. He hauled. Nora slid, scraped, kicked, and then she was up on the far edge, sprawled on her side, sucking ice-cold air that burned like pepper. Akecheta dumped the slack, cut the frayed section with his knife, and coiled what was left, breathing hard. "Move," he said. They find their feet. They moved, bent low, cutting a line through birch shade to a drifted draw. The soldiers behind shouted orders, counts, names. Rook's voice rode above them, thin and eager. "That way. She can't run far." Akecheta slowed only to drag a pine bough behind them for 10 steps, sweeping their tracks to a soft blur where the wind could finish the work. Then on again. The land fell away to a creek seam, running black under a skin of ice. A cottonwood had tipped, making a snow cave where the roots lifted like claws. Smoke teased the air, thin, clean, from a banked fire. "Shelter," Akecheta said. "Not ours, not theirs." He crouched and called low in Lakota. A replying cough came from the root tangle. Then a man's quiet. Come in with good mind. No rifles in hands." Akecheta set his bow aside and went to one knee to enter. Nora followed, feeling the child roll once. Slow. Inside the root cave, a small stove sat red at the cheeks. A pot steamed. A woman bent over it, stirring. Her hair, streaked with gray, was braided and wrapped with blue cloth. A little girl sat cross-legged by the stove, carving a goose from soft willow with a dull knife. Her tongue stuck out at the corner of her mouth with the focus. The man by the door lifted his palm. He wore a patched army coat over a trade shirt and leggings. Scars roped his knuckles. He smiled with half his mouth. "Greyhawk," he said, "you bring winter, or winter brings you." "Auntie Bluebird," Akecheta said to the woman, respectful, and bowed his head. "I bring a doctor who needs a fire." Auntie Bluebird flicked her eyes once over Nora, face, hands, the tightness of the belly under the coat. Her spoon paused. "Sit," she said, "hands out. You're white around the nails." Nora held her hands over the stove door. Heat licked bone. The little girl watched from the corner of her eye and shaved a curl from the willow. "I am Reed," she said solemnly, not stopping the knife. "This is a goose. It is not good yet." "It is getting there," Nora said, and Reed's mouth twitched, pleased. "We have stew," Auntie Bluebird said, "deer and wild onion. You will take 2 mouthfuls now and 2 after, not more." Her eyes cut to Nora's belly, then back up, permission asked without words. Nora nodded. "Waffala," she said. "Thank you." The man in the army coat poured from a kettle and held out a cup. "Harlan Dodd," he said. "Freighter in the warm months, useless man in the cold." He winked at Reed. "And their neighbor when the road is honest. Dodd runs a line between the fort and the mines." Akecheta told Nora. "He owes fewer men than they think." Dodd sipped first, then handed Nora the cup. "Soldiers are thick as frost up valley," he said, "looking for stolen brands, and for an Oglala who taught himself to make the law read slow." His grin said he liked that last part. "They'll sniff here," Auntie Bluebird said quietly. "They always do when they lose their place." "We will not stay," Akecheta said. He took the frayed rope and handed it to Reed. "For your geese," he told her. She beamed like he'd given her a silver pot. Auntie Bluebird ladled a little stew into a tin cup, set it to cool, and passed it to Nora. "Slow," she warned. "Your belly is tight." The storm put its hand there. Nora ate, 2 small spoonfuls. She felt the heat spread in her middle and the clamp ease. The stew tasted like hard work and patience. I owe you, she said. You pay by listening, Auntie Bluebird said. She nodded toward Akacheta. He tells you how to walk. You walk that way. He tells you how to speak at the council, what names to use, whose eyes to meet. You do that, and you do not cut across the wrong snow, because you think you know short roads. I won't, Nora said. She met Auntie's gaze and held it. I mean to keep the truth from being bent until it breaks. Auntie Bluebird's mouth softened. Good. But truth can be a cold thing if you hold it like a rock. Wrap it in cloth. Use breath on it. Dodd poured himself coffee and set the pot back. Word in Cheyenne, he said. Says Ephraim Rook swore on his mother's bone he'd straighten the broken bar brand in the county books come spring. Says he's got a doctor to do it. He thinks so, Nora said. Dodd snorted. He thinks lots. He bent, pulled a crate toward him, and worked out a piece of iron wrapped in burlap. He set it on the floor. It was a branding iron. The curve of the bar was wrong, a touch open where it should be tight. He nudged it with his boot. Picked this up off a dead hand outside Willowfold, he said. The man didn't need it anymore. It ain't the real broken bar. It's a cousin made to fool a book if a book is all you're looking at. Nora crouched and studied the iron, heat at her face. The angle here, she said, pointing with a stick, will blow out when the hide swells. It looks right in ink. In hair it lies. Akacheta nodded once, pleased by her eye. We will carry it, he said to Dodd. You'll bring it back, Dodd said mildly. Auntie Bluebird flicked her spoon like a small whip. You will bring back the spoon you borrowed last winter, too. I returned that spoon, Dodd protested. You returned a spoon, she said dry, and Reed smothered a giggle. Footsteps crunched outside. Voices, not Rook, Army. The measured beat of men who wanted the sound to warn the snow, not the people. Akacheta's head turned. Dodd kicked the burlap back over the iron and slid it under the stove with his boot. Auntie Bluebird set the pot lid straight and wiped the rim with her sleeve. Reed's knife went into her pocket like a little fish. Freighter Dodd, a voice called from outside. By order of the post, we're searching for stolen property and for a missing white woman. Dodd rose, joints creaking, and ducked out. The cold came in with his body and with 3 soldiers who didn't duck enough and hit their hats on the roots. The lieutenant stood at the mouth, hand on the lintel. He took in the picture. Old woman at the stove, child, Oglala man seated easy, white woman with a doctor's bag, and he didn't pretend not to see what he saw. Name, he said to Nora, tired. Again. Nora Bell, she said. Doctor. His eyes flicked to Auntie Bluebird, to Reed, to Akacheta, and back. I'll need to ask you to come to the road, he said. We've got to make a show of this search. You have made a show, Auntie Bluebird said. The Roots have never seen so much blue cloth. The lieutenant's mouth did a thing like it almost wanted to smile, and then remembered men were watching. Ma'am, he said, and then to Nora, please. Nora stood slow, so she didn't make anyone flinch. She put on her coat. Akacheta touched the back of her arm once. She nodded. They stepped out into white. Rook leaned against a cottonwood like the tree owed him a chair. His face had a bruise now, dark rising under the cold burn. He smiled when he saw Nora. Doctor, he said, like a man who finds his lost knife. You made a mess of our track. Nora said nothing. The lieutenant drew breath. Deputy Rook, he said, voice flat. You'll keep your comments to the facts. Fact is, Rook said, she's got my brother's bead and my boss's brand. Akacheta's head turned a fraction. Your brother, he said, soft. Rook's eyes jumped to him. You know him, Rook said, pleased at the chance to throw dirt. Traded with him, drank with him, stole with him. He's got a name like yours, he went on, mocking the shape of the syllables. But he says it in English so folks can spell it on warrants. Akacheta's face didn't change, but a tightness slipped into his jaw. He did not look at Nora. The lieutenant missed none of it. He set his boots square. We're taking everyone to the bank, he said. Questions get asked there. Auntie Bluebird shook her head and went back into the root cave, like soldiers, and storms were both things she had learned to step around without letting them into her bones. At the road, the talk became a tangle. Rook telling stories to make himself taller. Dodd telling less and making more sense. The lieutenant writing words he didn't like on a small pad with a stub pencil. When he asked Nora about the brand strip, she told him the truth plain. The forged iron, the angle that lies, the way hair swells, and tells on a cheat. When he asked about the bead, she closed her fist on the blue and said, "It does not belong to me. It does not belong to Deputy Rook." "Then to whom?" the lieutenant asked. "I will say that to the right ears," she replied, calm. "Council Place," Akacheta said. The lieutenant stared at him a moment, weighing trouble against winter, truth against orders. He rubbed his temple with his glove. "There's a shallow ford 2 miles down," he said. "We'll go together. If anyone shoots, I'll put him in a hole until June." Rook smirked like June belonged to him. "Lead on, Lieutenant." They moved as one slow caravan, soldiers, freighter, woman, bowman, deputy, through cottonwoods that whispered with ice. The ford ran black under sugar panes. A thin glaze lay on the shallows, flexing with the current. Willows made long shadows like ribs. Akacheta tested the ice with his heel and with a willow stick. He listened. He shook his head. "Not here," he said. "Under the bend. Road crosses here," Rook said. "Roads lie," Akacheta said. The lieutenant studied the thin skin. He saw where the water ran fast under, and where it pushed frost up into lace. "We'll take his bend," he told his men. "Nobody tests ice with a boot." He shot Rook a look. "Especially you." They cut downstream to where the creek pushed under a cut bank and ran slower. Alder roots showed like black hair. Akacheta found a tongue of gravel, and the ice over it sang dull, not bright. He tapped, listened, nodded. "Here." They crossed in a ragged line. Rook went last and made sure to splash so it sounded like he didn't mind anything cold could do to his feet. On the far side, the land lifted to sage and a rise where the wind had piled snow into low waves. A smudge of wood smoke showed beyond. Akacheta's shoulders eased a thumb's width. "We are close," he said. "We speak careful now." "Who are we speaking to?" Nora asked, low. "People who choose words like Flint chooses sparks," he said. "If we spend them wrong, they burn the wrong grass." They topped the rise. Beyond lay a winter camp, tucked tight in the lee of a rock shoulder. Teepees stood with smoke out their tops, hides patched and neat. Sleds lay stacked with brush. A line of meat hung frozen hard as iron. Dogs watched, silent, tails a low, slow sway. The first woman to step out lifted a hand with palm open. She wore a red trade blanket over a blue dress, a bone choker at her throat, hair braided and bound with otter. Her face was cut by wind and humor both. "Nephew," she called to Akacheta, "you bring the storm and a parade." "Aunt Luta," he said, with warmth that softened the corners of his mouth. He went close, but not too close, and touched her shoulder lightly. "I bring a doctor who walked out of a bad man's pocket, and men who think their paper makes a fence." A man stepped from behind the teepees next, tall, a scar down, his cheek like a twig line, hair tied. He wore a blue army coat over a wool shirt, beaded in a narrow pattern of sky blue and white, small diamonds that crossed and made a braid of light. His eyes found Akacheta and went still as ice. "Brother," he said. Nora felt the air change. Akacheta's mouth set. He did not answer the name. He said, to the woman in the red blanket, "We come to speak and to pass." The man with the scar stepped closer. "You always did like to pass," he said, smiling without warmth. He looked at the lieutenant. "You bring soldiers to a winter camp?" The lieutenant looked like a man who had stepped into church by mistake and was trying to leave without knocking over the candles. "We came to keep a deputy from making a worse mess," he said. Rook barked a laugh. "You can't keep me from anything, Ephraim." Nora's head jerked. She looked from Rook to the man with the beaded shirt. The man's scar at the cheekbone ridged when he smiled. "You are Ephraim Rook," she said, steady. He tipped his head, pleased she knew the name. The beadwork on his shirt flashed once, in a stray sun. The pattern was the same as the bead in Nora's fist. Blue and white diamonds crossed like a river, traced with light. Aunt Luta's eyes had gone to Nora's hand. She stepped forward, slow, and lifted her palm. "May I see?" she asked. She did not take. Nora opened her hand. The little sky bead looked like a piece of June that had forgotten what month it was. Aunt Luda's face changed, grief rolling through it like weather. "This bead is from my daughter's cradle board," she said. "I stitched that pattern before frost. The board was taken when soldiers came with cowmen and cut the lodges. I thought the river had it, but the river does not keep things like this." Nora's throat went tight. "In St. Louis," she said, "a priest put this bead in my hand, in a back room, to mark a ledger that has the wrong line. He said, 'It belongs where the names will not be read by the men who come when they smell money.' I took it. I kept it. I meant to give it here." Akacheta's eyes closed, only for a blink, like a man hit with a soft blow. "Wichapi Chikala," he said again, and this time his voice carried a little prayer with the sound. Ephraim Rook laughed, a quick, ugly sound. "Pretty," he said. "While you trade beads and prayers, I'll collect my property." He snapped his fingers at Nora's satchel. "Brand strip," he said. "Hand it." Nora did not move. The lieutenant did, a half step. "No one collects anything," he said. "Not here. Not on my watch." Ephraim's eyes slid to him. "Your watch ends when the sun drops behind that stone," he said. "Then you'll take your boys to their warm beds and leave the territory to men who work in it." Aunt Luda lifted her chin. "This is our bed," she said evenly. "You work in it, like a worm. The dogs." Tails stopped. The air thinned. Snow fell off a low branch with a whisper. Akacheta stepped between Ephraim and Nora by an inch, a way that said, "Talk to me first. If you want to talk to anyone, we will speak with the old ones," he told Aunt Luda, "and then we will go. The bead will stay. Not if it buys my brother a bottle," Ephraim said, that smile again. Akacheta's jaw tightened at the word brother, like leather pulling over bone. He still did not look at the man. He looked at Aunt Luda. "The council?" he asked. "In the big lodge," she said. "You walk in without your weapons in your hands. You sit when you are told. You do not make your words fast." Akacheta nodded. He took off his quiver and bow and set them on a wood sled. He looked at Nora. She set down her satchel beside them and kept only the bead. Aunt Luda watched this and gave a small nod. They entered the big lodge. Smoke made a blue roof under the poles. Heat lay like a sleeping cat. Old men and women sat along the far side, blankets over their legs, eyes sharp. A kettle hung from a cross stick. A baby coughed and was lifted and soothed. A boy stirred the fire with a stick. "Careful." Akacheta spoke first, in Lakota, slow and clear. He told the snow part, the rope part, the deputy, the brand, the bead. He did not say Ephraim's name. When he came to the bead, he pressed his palm once to his chest. An old man with a white braid cocked his head and asked 2 short questions. Akacheta answered them without cutting his own words thin. Then he stopped talking and let the fire fill the quiet. Nora spoke next, in English, and Aunt Luda gave her Lakota to the old ones, like a woman twisting a rope, strong, even, without knots. Nora kept her words small and square. She said oath. She said no harm. She said wrong line in a ledger and a priest who looked at the floor. She said men who ask a doctor to lie and then throw her into winter when she does not. She did not say any man's name who did not belong in that lodge. When she ran out of breath, she stopped. They sat with the old one's eyes on them, warm and hard, like hands on a back getting a knot out. The boy put one more stick on the fire. It snapped once. An old woman with hair like sifted flour spoke at last, voice thin and fine as thread. Aunt Luda gave the shape of it to Nora. She says a doctor's work is to tighten the cord that holds breath to bone. She says a man who makes marks to take calves he did not raise will cut his own cord when the law he made snarls around his ankle. She says the bead is not a coin. It is a name. Names do not pass in pockets. They pass in hands. Nora's eyes stung with something that wasn't just smoke. From outside, a crack of a rifle split the air thin. The lodge stilled. The boy froze with the stick lifted. Then a shout. Rook, triumphant, ugly. "Hold them. Fire if they move." The lieutenant's voice came a beat later, angry. "Stand down, damn you. That's an order." Men rushed. Dogs barked, all teeth and sound. Women moved like water around the baby. and the old ones, calm and fast. This was not their first winter. Akecheta was already up. He grabbed his bow from the sled with one hand and Nora's satchel with the other, and pushed Nora toward the lodge back where the hide seam could be pulled to make a door no Bluecoat knew. Aunt Luda shoved a bundle into Nora's arms. It was a fur robe, and under it, wrapped tight, a narrow board with beadwork down the side, the same pattern, blue and white diamonds crossed, sky caught and stitched. "Take it," Aunt Luda said. "The board last saw my granddaughter in summer. It will see her again." Nora began. "Walk," Aunt Luda said, and then she was gone, back into the flood of women who were making tea like war. They slipped the back seam and slid into a slot between snow and rock. The camp behind them moved in a pattern that was not panic. The lieutenant shouted orders that tried to sound big and came out sounding like a man bailing a boat with a hat. Rook's voice rode above, sharp and pleased. "Ephraim, the woman, there!" Ephraim did not shout. He moved, quiet and quick, to cut them off at the notch, where the wind had carved the rock smooth. He stood with his hands open, easy, like a man at a church door. "Doctor," he said, "you put a camp in trouble when you make your grand truth. Bring me the strip and the bead, and I'll take my brother off your back." "You're on my back," Akecheta said, finally looking full at him. There was no brother in his voice. Ephraim's eyes warmed. "Ah," he said, "there's the Greyhawk I know. Come on then, you and me. One last trade." Akecheta lifted the bow. "No trade," he said. Ephraim's smile did not move, but his eyes cut right and left. 4 men eased out of the rocks behind him. 2 cowhands with cold reddened noses, 1 town tough with a derby and a scarf over his ears, and a boy no older than Reed, with fingers too raw to hold a gun steady. "Put it down," the boy quavered, aiming at Nora, not at Akecheta. "No," Nora said, and stepped to put herself behind Akecheta's shoulder, not because she wanted him for a wall, but because it made the boy see his gun was on her, and not on a shape the boy's hands would not understand, until too late. The lieutenant's men tried to make a line, but the rocks broke them. Rook shouted something and fired wild at the sky. The shot cracked a lodgepole and sent sparks up in a hot river. Dogs tore loose and went for the loudest men. Akecheta notched and loosed in one breath. Ephraim's derby man yelped and dropped his gun when the arrow struck the wood beside his hand and stung splinters into his knuckles. The boy fired reflex and hit a rock, singing off stone like a tin can. "Back," Akecheta said to Nora, low. "To the cut, then to the horses." "Horses?" she asked low, because she had not seen any. "Dodd," he said, and as if named, Harlan Dodd appeared out of smoke, leading 2 small shaggy ponies, like he'd just remembered where he'd left them. "You owe me 2 spoons," he yelled at Auntie Bluebird over the clatter, and she cackled, even as she threw a kettle full of boiling snow water at a man aiming at her dog. "Up!" Dodd shoved a pony's rein into Nora's palm and slapped the animal's rump. "She knows the creek road. She'll take you if you don't lie to her." "I won't," Nora promised, and the pony flicked an ear like it cared about the answer. Akecheta leaped onto the second pony with no flourish, just a clean, practiced swing. He angled himself between Nora and the rocks where Ephraim moved like a bad thought, finding the crack they wanted. They cut out into the white with the camp boiling softer behind them. Noise, smoke, orders, a baby's cry, dog's fury. The lieutenant's voice went hoarse from shouting men into not making winter worse. Rook's voice kept cutting through, a thin saw. "Take the doctor," he cried. "Take her. She's the paper." They ran the pony trot that eats miles without breaking a heart. The creek cut a black ribbon. Willows scratched their legs like thin hands begging. They turned into a stand of jackpine, and the world dropped behind a green curtain. The noise faded to wind in needles. They slowed only when the pony's breath began to smoke wide and quick. Akecheta raised a hand. "Here," he said. "We fix feet. We eat a hand of food. We change how our track looks." They slid off. Nora's knees went weak with the change. She leaned against the pony's warm neck and let her eyes close for 3 breaths. The animal huffed and shook its mane and left a line of frost on her coat. Akacheta cut the rope slung under the pony's belly and pulled out 2 pairs of rough rawhide foot wrappings. He knelt and bound Nora's boots with the strips, lacing the soles so they printed wide and odd. He bound his own. "Now we are elk for a little while," he said. They ate jerky and a handful of parched corn Auntie Bluebird had stuffed into the robe bundle. Nora held the bead and the narrow cradle board on her knees and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. "Back there," she said after a time. "You're the man with the scar." "He is kin," Akacheta said, not giving him the word brother. "He took a name that spends easy in town. He wears beadwork he did not earn." His mouth thinned. "Once he held my mother's hand and kissed it every first snow. Now he drinks with men who tie rope like a prayer. I will take the bead pattern back to the cradle board. I will put his name where it cannot walk on other people's bread." "He said he would trade," Nora said. "He always did," Akacheta answered. "Breath for bottle, rope for coin, friend for easy sleep." He looked at the low sky. "He will come again. He will not come alone." They moved on. Tracks widened, then lost in a patch of wind-scoured crust where nothing holds a shape. The light went gray. A crow spoke from a cottonwood, and then another. Snow began to fall with no wind, soft and steady, the kind that hides lines and slows everything down without drama. At dusk, the land rose and let them see the black cut of the river across the plain. The big river, rimmed in white, breathing fog. On its far bank, in a stand of willow and young cottonwood, smoke drafted up in a neat gray finger. A ferry rope sagged from bank to bank with frozen rime. "The ford," Akacheta said. "The rope belongs to a quiet man who takes coin with both hands and counts twice." "Will he take us?" Nora asked. "He takes anyone who does not point a gun at his dog," Akacheta said. They dropped to the river. The ice along the edge creaked like old boards. The ferryman, a tall man with a knitted red cap, pushed out of his shack and looked at them with no surprise. "Cold," he observed. "You make bad friends." "We make them talk too much," Dodd said, trotting up behind. He had kept loose to check the road and thrown off 2 men by the trick of greeting them too cheerfully to shoot. "2 across," he told the ferryman. "No blue coats. Blue coats pay," the ferryman said. "They also promise to pay this spring on a tally they lose in a stove," Dodd replied. "We got coin now." Nora put her hand to the bead and then to the cradle board. "And I have this," she said to the ferryman, not as payment, but as proof she was not a thing passing wrong. The ferryman looked like a man who minded his own, but learned to read weather in faces. He nodded once. "Dog won't get shot," he said. "Load." They pushed the flat boat off the crusted bank and onto black water that wore a lace of ice, and sighed. The rope hummed a little under the rime as the ferryman pulled hand over hand. Midstream, the ice groaned, and a pane lifted and broke with a bell note. The boat rocked. Nora tightened hands on the cradle board. Akacheta planted his boots and bent knees to take the sway. Dodd whistled low through his teeth like a man at a poker table who had decided not to look at the next card. They hit the far bank and shoved through ice to mud. The ferryman leaned and spat. "You didn't see me," he said. "Wouldn't know you in a church full of your kin," Dodd said cheerfully. They climbed the far bank and came into willow that held the wind out of their coats. A hand clapped slow from the trees beyond. Ephraim Rook stepped out with 8 men, 2 soldiers with their coats buttoned wrong and faces apologetic, 3 town men with their hats pulled low, 2 cowhands who looked tired of everything but money, and Silas Rook himself, with a cheek bruise now green-yellow and a grin that had learned nothing. "I knew you'd choose the rope," Ephraim said. "You always liked lines you could hold. Lieutenant," he called into the trees. Without turning, "You can come see this if you want. Bring your pad. Put your law eyes on a nice clean arrest." The lieutenant strode into view with 2 privates, his jaw set, his eyes raw with the day. He took in the scene at a glance and swore under his breath. "Rook," he said, "you don't have jurisdiction over a ferry on this bank." "I got jurisdiction over that woman," Silas said, pointing at Nora like a man picking buffalo off a painting, "and over that beaded wood she's packing, and over the brand strip in her bag." "You have nothing," the lieutenant said. "You had a bluff that slid into a river." Ephraim's smile stayed. but his eyes cooled. I have men, and I have time, and I have a thing that'll make our doctor come quiet. He lifted a hand. A woman stepped from behind him, wrapped in a shawl, hair plain, eyes red from weather, and something else. She held her coat with both hands across her middle. She looked at Nora, not like an enemy, but like a mirror that had been told a terrible story. This is Ruth, Ephraim said. She is my brother's friend. She is also, by our paper, the mother of a child the doctor means to steal. Ruth's voice came small and fierce. He said you took my baby's bead, she told Nora. He said you took my baby's name. Her mouth shook. He said you did it to hide your own shame. The snow seemed to take sound and put it under glass. Nora felt the lie hit the air like dust in lungs. She stepped forward, slow, palms out. Ruth, she said, listen, your baby's bead is not your baby's bead. It was sewn into a board that was taken before your baby was cold. Your name is on a line that belongs to another woman. Your shame is a trick Ephraim sells by the bottle. Ruth's hands tightened. Her eyes flicked to Ephraim. He looked back with that easy warmth. She lies, he told Ruth gently. She lies in good sentences, but she lies. Akacheta's bow stayed low but ready. Dodd's hand eased toward his coat, where the wrong spoon lived. The lieutenant looked like a man trying to count a flock, while wolves ran through it. Give me the bead, Ephraim said to Nora. Give me the strip. Then I can make whole what winter broke. My boss will forgive a slide, if the books read clean by March. If I give you the bead, Nora said, clear and slow, a cradle board stays empty. If I give you the strip, 10 calves lose their mothers in paper, and then in grass. If I give you both, you will come for my child next and say, the ledger told you to. Ephraim sighed like a man bored at a bad play. You always liked the stage, he told her. He lifted 2 fingers. 2 men stepped forward with rope. Akacheta said, no, like winter says no to a small fire. He shifted a hair, and that put his body between Nora and the ropes. Shoot him in the leg, Silas said, casual. The boy from the rocks was here now too, eyes wide, hand shaking. He lifted the rifle like a stick too heavy to carry. The lieutenant barked, lower that gun! The boy flinched and fired. The shot smacked a willow trunk by Akacheta's thigh and sent wet bark into the air. The horses reared. Dodd swore. Ruth cried out, without choosing to. Chaos does not ask permission. Men shouted. One soldier slipped and went to a knee in slush. Rook shoved him down, hunting a cleaner line for his own shot. Ephraim moved with a calm that made the space around him ugly. Go, Akacheta said to Nora. Cut right, the dog path. Nora went right. The bead and the cradleboard thumped her ribs. Boots slipped. She caught a willow and swung around it, breath burning. The dog path dove into brush that clawed her coat. She pushed. Branches slapped her face. Behind her, feet crashed. Men swore. Someone laughed, and the laugh told her exactly which man it was. The path broke out on a shelf above the river, where ice flaked and drifted like white moths. The shelf narrowed to a ledge. Below, black water ran, cold and smooth. Above, the shelf overhung, a cornice of dirt and old root, like a mouth with bad teeth. Akacheta's feet hit the shelf a breath behind hers. He looked at the ledge, at the river, at the root's bite. He looked at Nora's belly. Give me the board, he said. She handed him the cradle board. He slung it across his back and cinched the cord. He reached for her hand, and someone hit him from the side like a thrown log. Ephraim drove his shoulder into Akacheta's ribs and took them both against the dirt lip. Soil crumbled. Roots tore. With a wet scream, Nora lunged and caught Akacheta's wrist. He caught a root with his free hand. Ephraim grabbed the cradleboard cord and yanked. It stuck. He snarled and yanked again. The cord bit into Akacheta's shoulder. A small bead popped free from the edge of the board and jumped and vanished into the black water with a tiny sound no ear could love. No, Aunt Luda's voice carried thin from the trees behind. They had run too, because you run toward what holds your name. Rook's men crashed on the path. The lieutenant shouted himself hoarse. Dodd fired once and barked his shin on a rock and cursed like a prayer. The root Akacheta gripped began to peel out of the dirt like a tooth loosening. Ephraim's grin showed 2 real teeth, and a gold one. "Trade," he panted. "Bead for breath, strip for brother." A new sound rolled under everything, a grind, deep, old. The shelf did not like so many men. It had been waiting since flood times to let go. It thought now. Akecheta looked at Nora. His eyes were calm the way a lake is calm before it takes your reflection and keeps it. "Let go," he said. "I won't," she said. "You will," he said, "or all of us go down, and the board, and the bead, and your child's breath with us." He twisted his wrist in her grasp, not to break her hold, but to set her fingers where they could feel the truth he was telling. Bone on bone, skin on cord. "Trust the land," he said softly. "Just this once. It wants a price. Choose which thing you pay." Behind him, Ephraim pulled the cord again. The cradleboard slid an inch. The cornice groaned. The ledge cracked. Black water below licked its lips. "Choose," Akecheta repeated, and the shelf opened its mouth. Nora did the brutal thing love demands. She let go. Akecheta fell 1 arm's length. His free hand found a lower root and held. The cradleboard cord jerked as Ephraim yanked again. The knot bit deeper into Akecheta's shoulder. The root above him peeled another inch, groaning like a bad tooth. Under them, the river slid by with the dark patience of a blade. "Knife," Nora said to herself, and her hand was already in her coat. She flicked the blade open with her thumb. She looked for the cord, for the board, for Akecheta's weight. The shelf boomed again. Dirt sheared away in a curtain. Silas stumbled back and swore. The lieutenant barked orders he barely controlled. Dodd lunged and shoulder-checked the boy with the shaking gun, sending the muzzle into the snow. "Choose," Akecheta said once more. Calm, not begging, not commanding. A rope you could use to cross a bad place. Nora chose. She slid on her belly, planted her boots, and reached past Akecheta's ribs for the cord that Ephraim held. She sawed once, twice. The rawhide smoked under the blade with friction. Ephraim snarled, leaned his full weight, and the cord parted with a sudden furious sigh. The board came free to Akecheta. Ephraim's hand, expecting resistance, jerked backward. His heel hit air. The shelf under him broke clean. He fell like a man stepping into an empty room he thought was full. He grabbed for anything. His fingers caught Nora's coat cuff and ripped it. He caught Silas's sleeve next. Silas yelped and tore away. Ephraim went over the lip, striking the black water with a flat crack and vanishing under broken ice. For a heartbeat, time forgot to move. Then the river surged and drew white plates together over the place where he went in. The current carried a hat rim. It carried a gold tooth's flash. Then it carried nothing you could name. Silas screamed his brother's name into the cold until the sound died in his throat. Akecheta dragged himself up the crumbling edge, a stripe of dirt across his cheek, the cradleboard tight across his back. Nora grabbed his forearm and hauled. The shelf gave one more lurch and then settled at a mean new angle, satisfied with the price it had set. The lieutenant's men formed a ragged line without needing to be told. Faces white, eyes big. No one fired. Ruth stood like a winter sapling, straight and trembling, hands to her mouth. Silas spun, face gray-green, and raised his rifle at Nora with the wildness of a man whose world just cut itself in half. Dodd hit him from the side with the ugly strength of a freighter who lifts sacks all day. The rifle went wide and barked at the sky. The lieutenant strode in and smashed the rifle barrel aside with his gloved hand, then drove his shoulder into Silas and pinned him into a willow with a snarl that did not sound like any church word. "Enough," he said, hoarse. "In the name of any law worth reading, enough." Silas sagged, not in remorse, in calculation. He looked from the river to Nora to the cradleboard. "I'll write you out of this," he hissed. "I'll make a line so clean you'll thank me to sign it." "No," Nora said. One small, square word that fit every line he'd ever tried to draw through her. Snow began to fall again, soft, steady, as if the sky were ashamed of what the ground had done and wanted to cover it decent. The ferryman's dog barked once and then sat, ears flat, watching men act like weather. They trussed Silas with the same rope he had brought. The lieutenant did it himself. He did not enjoy it. He did it like a chore that would keep a barn from burning. He looked at the river's black slit, and then at Akacheta, at the dirt on his face, at the beadwork on the board, across his back. "I'll send men to drag," he said, reluctant, knowing the river kept what it wanted. "For the sake of the record." Akacheta nodded once. "For the sake of his mother," he said, and there was no forgiveness in it, but there was no hate either. There was only a cord cut clean. Ruth stepped forward, shawl pulled tight. She looked at Nora with a dozen stories in her wet eyes. "If I've been lied into a shape that fits some man's pocket," she said softly, "I want to step out of it now." "You will," Nora said, "with us." They made for the winter camp under a sky that fell in small white coins. The ferryman sent them with a nod and a hand on his rope, like a man blessing a boat he would never board. The lieutenant walked beside Silas, hand on his collar, jaw grinding. Dodd walked a little ahead, because someone had to see what was coming. They came up the notch into ordered noise. Women moving hot water, men setting poles back right, the lieutenant's 2 strays returning to their captain, with eyes lowered and hats in their hands. Aunt Luda stood at the big lodge, face set, like a woman deciding how much wood to put on a long fire. She saw the cradleboard on Akacheta's back and lifted a hand to her mouth and let it fall without letting her breath out. Inside the big lodge, the old ones waited, blankets neat, eyes clear. Akacheta set the cradleboard down like he was laying a child in sleep. Nora knelt and put the blue bead from her palm into Aunt Luda's hand. Aunt Luda closed her fingers, and when she opened them again, tears had made 2 clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The old man with the white braid gestured. A boy, solemn, careful, brought in a strip of fresh hide from a cow, butchered at the soldier post last week, traded for wood. Dodd held up the burlap-wrapped brand iron he'd taken off a dead hand and set it near the coals. The metal's face turned dull, then hotter, then orange at the edge. Nora rose and faced the old ones and the lieutenant together, because truth needed both rooms to hear it. "In a book," she said, lifting the iron so its heat warmed her wrist hair. "This curve looks true enough. On hair and skin, it lies." She pressed the iron to the wet hide at an angle. The hiss filled the lodge like a snake. When she lifted it away, the mark had blown out at the weak angle, leaving a telltale flare, a second bite where the real broken bar would be clean. The lieutenant leaned. He touched the edge with a fingertip and hissed at the heat. He looked over his shoulder at Silas and at the 2 town men who had followed to see the show. The men tried to look bored. They looked trapped. Dodd laid a second mark next to the first with another iron he'd had under his crate. The true broken bar borrowed from a man who kept quiet when smart. It burned clean, the line snug where the cousins splayed. Even a clerk who loved ink could see it. "This is not paper," Nora said. "This is hair and heat and truth." The old woman with flower hair said a thing soft and tired and kind. Aunt Luda gave it to Nora as she had before. "She says you kept your oath without making it a hammer. She says you cut the wrong cord and left the right one tied." Ruth stepped closer, shawl tight. "And the bead?" she asked, voice small. "The names?" Aunt Luda turned the blue bead in her finger pads like she could feel the pattern stitched into its color. She looked at Ruth's face for a long, steady count. Then she lifted the cradleboard and traced the diamond braid with her thumb. "My granddaughter was taken the day the snow came early," she said, words even like fence posts. "Cows came with men who wore blue. They cut ropes and lines. They took boards and babies and said the law would fix the names later." She looked at the lieutenant. The law did not fix. It made more ropes. The lieutenant took the hit and did not dodge. "It did," he said, "and sometimes I held the other end." Ruth flinched like she had expected a gentler lie. Then she breathed out. "If everything was switched," she said to Nora, "then the bead they put in my hand at St. Louis was a story they sold me to shut me up." Nora nodded once. "I think so." Ruth's face went through a dozen weathers. "Then I want the right story," she said. "Even if it makes me cold, it will make you warm," Aunt Luda said, and reached and touched Ruth's cheek with 2 fingers. Ruth startled, then stilled like a bird deciding not to fly. Aunt Luda looked at the old ones. They nodded as if counting something that had taken too long. She turned back to the cradle board and the bead. This board knows one name, she said. It does not know Ruth. It does not know Ephraim. It knows a little girl whose mother sang to her in Lakota and said the song over her head when the wind cried. We will put that name back. The doctor will write what white paper needs to see, and I will speak the part that paper does not understand. When the river opens, we will go to the priest and make his eyes look at the floor again, and then up. Silas tried to spit. The lieutenant's grip tightened. You'll speak in court, the officer told him. Silas smiled a thin smile that meant he was already trying to remember where a clerk drank. We'll see, he said. We will, the lieutenant said, and there was a bone-deep promise in it that did not need a badge. He looked at Nora. You will write what you just showed. You will come to the post and make copies. You will keep one. I will keep one. Aunt Luta will keep one. Dodd will keep one and hide it where only dogs know. If a clerk loses his, the dogs will remind him. Dodd touched his hat brim. Dogs are good at remembering where men forget. A keening started outside, the quiet, awful song that means a body came back from a river, colder than any grief. It rose, fell, braided the wind. Silas looked toward the sound, and that thin smile went out. He sagged again. Don't, he said, to no one and everyone. Don't look at me with that sound. Aunt Luta did not grant him the grace of attention. She looked at Akecheta. You will sleep on the warm side tonight, she said. In the morning, you will take the board to my daughter. You will take the doctor as far as the fort. After that, she will do her paperwork, and you will go where the snow tells you. Akecheta inclined his head. Haya. Yes. Ruth stood very straight. I will go with you, she said to Aunt Luta, voice showing the cost and paying it anyway. If your daughter wants to look at the woman who carried a wrong name, she can. If she wants me to carry wood, I will. If she wants me to sit outside until wind eats my ears, I will. Her jaw set. I will not hold a lie in my mouth again. Aunt Luta looked at her long. Sit by the fire, she said. Your ears can wait. You will need them to hear your name when it changes shape. They ate together, enemies, and not. The old ones watching the food go where it needed. The lieutenant took a bowl like any man, sat on a crate, and let steam wash his wet eyes. Dodd told a story about a mule that learned the smell of counterfeit coin. Reed brought the ruined rope and asked Akecheta to show her how to tie a good knot. He did. Slow, patient, fingers sure. Night ground its heel on the ridge. The wind tucked itself into the sage and slept. The camp breathed. Before dawn, Akecheta and Nora stood at the lodge flap and listened to the world think about light. Their breath smoked. The bead lay in Aunt Luta's pouch now. The cradleboard rested against the lodge pole. Ready. Akecheta touched the board, as a man might touch a drum that once knew his grandfather's hand. He didn't look at Nora when he spoke. My brother used to come to first snow with meat and 3 jokes, he said. He gave the last joke to the dogs. They laughed more honest. I'm sorry, Nora said. He tilted his head. For which thing? He asked. Not cruel. For the river, she said. For the cord I cut. For the cord you asked me to cut. He turned, and in the blue light his eyes held both winter and spring. The land took what it was owed, he said. If it had taken me, it would not have been because you held wrong. Do not make yourself too big in your own story. That is a white disease. Nora huffed a laugh that made a ghost in the cold. I am cured, she said. They walked at first light. Aunt Luta, Ruth, 2 young men with sleds, Akecheta with the board, Nora with her satchel, the lieutenant and 2 soldiers, and Silas on a rope. Dodd drove the pony with supplies, whistling through his teeth when the trail asked for attention. The sky cleared to a hard bowl. The snow squeaked under boots like mice. At a low ridge, they stopped. The trail split, one way toward the fort, one toward a bend where the river waited for spring to give it back its voice. Aunt Luta touched Nora's arm. You walk your road, she said. Do not let men add turns. I will write in straight lines, Nora said. Good, Aunt Luta replied. And when a line needs to bend, make sure it bends around a child and not around a man's pocket. Nora smiled. Yes, Aunt. Ruth faced Nora with her shawl tight. If I am called to speak in a room with walls, she said, will you stand where I can see you? Where you can lean, Nora said. Ruth nodded once, and that put a stitch into a new cloth where an old one had torn. She turned and went with Aunt Luda toward the bend that held one woman's name and would give it back. The lieutenant tipped his hat brim to Akacheta and to the old ones. He started the slow walk toward the post, with Silas at the end of a short rope and 2 soldiers, who did not look proud and did not look ashamed. They looked like men who had learned today how far a bad order travels and how to step out of its way. Dodd fell in beside Nora and Akacheta for a while, because it is good to have a man at your shoulder who can lift and joke and keep the road honest. You still owe Bluebird 2 spoons, Nora said. Dodd sighed. I owe the world a kitchen, he said. I'll start with spoons. They reached the fort by noon. The flag hung slow. The post smelled like old coffee, horse, and tired paper. Nora sat at a rough table in a side room and wrote in a hand the clerks would have to respect. Simple words, clean letters. She wrote how a liar's iron makes a blowout on wet hide. She wrote how a bead pattern crosses in diamonds that do not turn into coins when you look away. She wrote which men stood where and who said what, with the lieutenant signing and Dodd printing his name slow and proud, and Aunt Luda holding the bead pouch and saying which parts did not belong to paper. Silas sat on a stool with rope on his wrists and watched the tip of Nora's pen with hatred that looked more tired than hot. He smiled once when she reached to rub her cramped fingers, and then stopped when she kept going. When the copies were sanded and folded and tied with string, Nora put one in her satchel and tied the knot the way Akacheta had tied Reed's practice rope. She slipped a second into Aunt Luda's pouch and a third into Dodd's coat pocket. The lieutenant took his and put it in an oiled bag inside his coat, like a man putting an ember where it can't go out. Now you go, Aunt Luda said to Akacheta, before the road warms and turns to knives. They left through the post gate, and the air felt cleaner. Akacheta led, easy in his body again in the open. Nora matched his pace, hips loose for the child and the miles. They spoke less. They read more. Crow calls, rabbit dots. A coyote's line sketched between sage fans. The sun slid to evening copper. They found a cutbank, dry, with old grass and a curl of heat still in the soil. They made a little fire that spoke in willow and did not call men. Nora sat with her back to dirt and looked at the bead pouch in Aunt Luda's hand in her mind and felt something in her chest that had been knotted yield by a hair. I told Chaska once, she murmured, and caught herself, because that was the name from an earlier telling, the name she had displaced without meaning to. She smiled at her own stumble. I told myself once, she corrected, that the land and the law bend the same way. They do not. They bend toward the heavy thing tied to them, Akacheta said. Make sure you tie the right thing. They ate parched corn and a piece of dried meat that gave more salt than joy, but kept the legs honest. The stars came out with the hard shine of true things. A coyote sang, and the cold carried it clean. Near midnight, hoof thumps stitched the dark. One rider, not hurrying, not scouting, just coming like a man who had decided a path long before, and was now walking it to see if it held. Akacheta nudged the fire to a hush and stood into shadow. Nora set her hand on her satchel and did not move. The rider stopped at the edge of their small world. He held his hands out. Empty. Lieutenant sent me, he said softly. Old priest at the river town sent something too. He slid down and handed Nora a folded paper. The seal had been lifted and pressed again. The wax bore a thumbprint, like a human admission. Nora broke it. The priest's hand had written with the fear of a man who had held 2 truths and chosen the wrong one, and now wanted to breathe clean. He named the day in St. Louis. The ledger line crossed to hide soldiers' theft. The bead put in a white woman's palm to buy silence. The Rook brothers' payment to his cousin. He wrote that he had come north to speak that wrong into the right ear, and that the right ear was not his bishop's. Nora handed the paper to Akacheta. He did not read, but he listened while she did. When she finished, He nodded once. Good, he said. Words that burned, making smoke we can see. The rider touched his brim. Lieutenant says he'll drag the river again, he said. Not for the deputy, for the mother. He hesitated. He says if you want a letter carried to the east, he'll send it with a man who won't open it. Nora wrote 2 lines on the priest's paper in the blank at the bottom. She wrote to the boarding house woman who had taught her to tie knots in hair and in words. She wrote to the cousin who had feared her own name. She folded that letter into the priest's and sealed both in oiled cloth. Thank you, she told the rider. When he had gone, the dark settled like a blanket you didn't know you had wanted. Akecheta tipped his face to the stars and said something in Lakota that sounded like a man paying a debt and asking nothing back. Dawn came blue. They walked in a world of frost that broke and tinkled at the grass blades' tips. By noon, the mountains stood closer, hard and clean. The pass waited, a white mouth with a tongue of wind. The same kind of place where the story had begun. The same kind of place where men get small or true. At the lip, the cornice sang, high and thin. Akecheta stopped, head cocked, listening. He smiled a little, like he was greeting a difficult cousin who had decided to behave. We go left, he said. The note is less proud there. They crossed the singing place on feet that knew how to move without angering a slope. At the far side, the basin opened. Sage dots, a ribbon of black water. A fox trotted, looked back over its shoulder, said nothing anyone could hear, and moved on. Nora touched her belly and felt a strong, slow roll. You can wait until the ground is flat, she told the child. The child thumped once, as if negotiating terms. By mid-afternoon they saw the smoke of a rail siding and the black line of cars that would take them to the next rooms where truth had to be spoken. Dodd peeled off with a shout about dry roads and bluebird spoons. He lifted a hand and vanished in cottonwood, like a man the land had decided to keep an eye on. At the track, men lifted freight with numb hands and swore with real affection at a mule that had gone stance stubborn for warmth. A woman at a tea barrel smiled without asking questions and poured cups. A boy swept snow into neat ridges and then kicked them apart for fun. The world, which had tried to kill them, went on like a stove that needed wood no matter what names had been untied that morning. Akecheta stood with the cradleboard in his hands one last time and looked west. Somewhere beyond those hills, a woman would take the board and put her child's name back into it, like a bead laid in a pattern, so old it felt new. He breathed out and handed the board to Nora so she could hand it back to Aunt Luda's daughter with doctor's hands instead of law's hands. Why do you never say your brother's name? Nora asked, finally, not prying, not to heal, just to understand the shape of the road she had walked beside. Akecheta watched steam from the tea barrel twist into the air and vanish. Names are cords, he said. If you say a man's name when his rope is around other people's throats, you pull with him. I will use his name when it does not pull wrong. He looked at her belly. You will choose a name that pulls right. Tie it to the right things. Nora smiled. I will tie it to the truth, she said, and to people who read snow. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then your child will live to hear crows grow old. The train coughed and shrieked, impatient. Nora climbed the step, turned, and held out her hand. Akecheta took it just for the one breath it took to say goodbye with fingers. He stepped back. She stepped in. As the cars groaned and the world slid, Nora looked down the length of the platform. The lieutenant stood there with his hat in his hands, like a man at a funeral who had decided to stop pretending he came for duty. Dodd leaned on a crate with his wrong spoon in his pocket and whistled a tune about mules. Reed ran in a circle and pretended to be a goose. Aunt Luda stood still as rock, with the bead pouch against her heart, and Ruth beside her, head high, eyes on the horizon, where her name would change shape and still be hers. Nora set her palm on her stomach and made a promise without saying it aloud. No clerk, no deputy, no brother would write this child's line but her, and she would write it straight and hard and clean. The train took her east toward paper and back rooms and rooms where men liked to hear their own ink. Akecheta turned west toward the bend in the river and a woman who had a song to finish. The wind settled. The brand iron at the fort cooled. The bead warmed in Aunt Luda's hand until it felt like a small piece of June that would not forget itself again. After image. Fresh snow softens the bad ledge. The river carries a hat into reeds and then lets it go. A single blue bead, stitched back into the cradleboard's braid, glints once in winter light and looks exactly like a star that decided to stay on Earth. If you made it here, tell me where you're watching from. Next time, when we follow a blood trail stamped into prairie glass, you'll see how a single, wrong hoof mark can turn a whole town's law around.